Revealed, the sinister last recording of 7 haunted souls before they disappeared without a trace. Whispers echoed through Ashford Pines, a town that had always worn the mask of normalcy. But that mask cracked when 7 families vanished without a trace, leaving behind no clues, only fear. Julia, a weary single mother, felt the chills seep into her bones. As she poured another cup of coffee for her friend Sarah, she couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister lingered just beyond the edges of their lives. The laughter of her children, Jake and Mia, filled their small home, an oasis amidst the anxiety swirling outside. But that laughter was now a fragile barrier against the dread that settled in. A deep sense of unease crept through the neighborhood, intensified by insistent knocks at odd hours and shadows creeping just out of sight. Then came the lifeline, a desperate audio recording sent by one of the missing residents. As Julia hit play, her heart raced. The frantic voice floated through the speaker, revealing dark secrets tied to a corrupt local authority. Financial manipulation, illicit dealings, it was all there, just beneath the town's cheerful surface. Julia's fingers trembled as the truth washed over her. She learned to fear who she thought she could trust. Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Fears spiraled as the nights grew longer. Julia began seeing flickers of movement just outside her window, unexplainable shadows darting in the corners of her vision. The air grew thick with something unnameable, and each knock at her door sent icy tendrils of panic racing down her spine. The entities from Ashford Pines folklore raged in her mind, legends of spirits collecting debts from the living. She fought against the clutches of paranoia, convinced each creak of the house whispered threats in the darkness. One fateful night, the ultimate horror erupted, tearing through the thin veil of her sanity. A blood-curdling scream shattered the silence, freezing Julia in place. Heart pounding, she grasped her phone, creeping toward the front door as her breath caught in her throat. The stillness felt alive, pressing against her skin as she opened the door. A silhouette vanished into the shadows across the street, leaving only an eerie emptiness behind. "Mom!" Mia's voice pulled her back. Julia hesitated, instinct clashing with curiosity. As fear tightened its grip, a familiar face emerged from the shadows, a neighbor she'd shared recipes with. But this was not the same woman. Wearing a twisted grin, she stepped onto her porch. "You should have left it alone," she hissed, as the shadows thickened around them. Julia's heart raced. Who else had been hiding in the darkness? Who could she trust now? As her world spiraled, she felt the nightmare closing in. Would she face the terror or flee into the unknown, leaving her children vulnerable? The air crackled with dread, and she braced herself, knowing that whatever lay ahead would determine their fate. The twisted grin of her neighbor sent waves of nausea through Julia. This was not a friendly exchange, it was a warning laden with malice. Julia's eyes darted back to her children, still giggling in the living room, unaware of the darkness creeping closer. The very walls of their home felt as if they were closing in, suffocating her with fear. "Stay inside!" she shouted back to Mia, her voice trembling. The shadows lengthened at her feet, swirling like a black mist that threatened to consume her whole. She knew she should shut the door, pull her children away from whatever evil loitered beyond. But the woman's eyes held her, a dark abyss where sanity faded. "They're not safe," her neighbor hissed, tilting her head unnaturally. The others, they didn't see it coming. "I was too late." "But you can still escape it," panic surged. Julia couldn't reason. Every instinct screamed at her to retreat, but each second stretched into an eternity under the ominous weight of those words. "Leave my family alone." She forced out the command, pushing against the dread tightening around her throat. A crack of thunder splintered the night, the storm that had rolled in suddenly raging outside. Rain battered the porch like frantic hands, drumming a chaotic rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Julia instinctively stepped back, gathering strength to slam the door shut. But the woman lunged forward, catching the edge with one skeletal hand. "No! You need to listen." The shadowy mist thickened, swirling around her, blurring the line between friend and foe. Julia felt it a compulsion to listen, to understand her. "What do you mean?" Even she was horrified by her own words, as if she were an outsider in her own life. "Revelations," she whispered, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "Manifestations of their sins. You hear the whispers, don't you? They're coming for you." Before Julia could answer, Mia squealed in delight, tumbling toward the door. The loud eruption of her laughter shattered the moment. "Mom, can we go outside?" "No!" Julia shouted, her voice sharp and raw. She yanked the door open wider, placing herself between her child and the dark figure looming just outside. "Get away! Go back!" The neighboress' laughter rang out, sharp and phantasmal, intertwining with the storm's fury. "You can't keep them safe, Julia." They already know. Another scream erupted from across the street, twisting Julia's heart into knots. It echoed, ghostly and distant, pulling at her consciousness like an ominous lullaby. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, but the woman's grin only widened. The front porch felt haunted. Julia's skin prickled, and her hands shook as the shadows shifted. With each crack of thunder, another scream seemed to fade into the air, swallowed by the wind. "You need to leave." "But where?" The thought gnawed at her. The familiarity of Ashford Pines felt like a lie, a thin veil over the horror lurking underneath. Julia turned briefly back into the house, eyes darting from the shadows beyond her door to the innocent glee of her children. A shard of dread pierced through her. What if they were already lost? Unburdened by the dread that enveloped her, a piercing thought struck: if her family was in danger, could they leave Ashford Pines? But where would they go? The fear of the unknown was almost more terrifying than the evils waiting outside. With resolute defiance, Julia took a step forward, closing the distance between her heartbeat and the haunting truth. Before she could speak, the neighbor suddenly twisted away into the dark. But she turned one last time, eyes glinting like chipped glass. "It's already begun," and then she vanished, leaving only echoes behind. Julia's chest heaved as the weight of despair pressed in around her. She had to act fast. But the storm was only just gathering strength, and so was the terror that whispered through the air, dark and menacing, ready to claim them all. As she turned back to her children, Julia felt eyes upon her, disembodied stares lingering in the edge of her vision. "What was that?" Jake called out, his childlike inquisitiveness cut sharply by the tension. The laughter faded. What else was lurking in the unseen? And in that haunting darkness, Julia realized, whatever followed them was hungry. She could no longer ignore the truth lurking just outside her door. Would they stay in this cursed place, or would they escape the coffin Ashford Pines had become? The answer danced on the edge of her consciousness, but she knew one thing: time was running out. The storm's fury crashed around them, contributing to the chaos in Julia's mind. Her body felt rigid, caught in a tug-of-war between instinct and desperation. "Kids! Stay away from the door!" she barked, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Panic surged as she realized they weren't safe, not even within the supposedly secure walls of their home. Mia and Jake were only inches away now, their innocent laughter ringing through the air like an ill-timed bell. Julia's eyes locked on them, yet every ounce of attention was drawn back outside, to the lingering, haunting shadows that slipped through the rain-slicked night. Her chest tightened as every tier of fabric and reality seemed to unravel. What was wrong with the neighbor? What did she mean by "they already know"? Those words wrapped around her brain like a serpent, squeezing tighter with each breath. The flickering porch light cast fleeting images across the yard, straying shadows playing tricks on her vision. Julia's fingers trembled against the doorframe. She took another step forward, the sight of her children grounding her just enough to contain the chaos bubbling in her chest. A sharp crack of thunder exploded above, and the house shuddered, prompting Julia to spin back around. Time was a cage, and she was trapped inside. She needed a plan, a bolt of clarity. "We have to pack. We're leaving!" she shouted, the urgency in her voice rising above the storm.
But why, Mommy? Mia's innocent brow furrowed. We never go anywhere in a storm. Because it's dangerous. I need you both to listen to me. Julia's voice quivered as she glanced nervously back at the door, half expecting the sinister figure to reappear. Get your things. Now. The thunder rolled, deep and ominous, like a tolling bell marking the end of something. The children hesitated, puzzled by the panic drumming in Julia's voice. As Mia turned to lead Jake back toward the living room, Julia caught a glimmer of movement. Her breath caught, something was out there, lurking just beyond the veil of rain. Mom, I can't find my teddy. Jake's voice, small and scared, shattered the moment. Get your shoes on. We can't waste time. She shouted, her heart racing. But deep down, she knew the stuffed animal was a distraction. The more pressing danger loomed larger outside. Mommy! Mia called out suddenly, her little voice thick with confusion. What's that? They both pointed to the window. Julia pivoted, dread pooling in her gut as her eyes flicked to where they were focused. A figure obscured by rain, gliding unnaturally against the rhythm of the storm. She barely saw the outline, but the sense of wrongness made her stomach clench. It was like staring into a void that gorged on fear. The children were stepping closer, curiosity igniting their innocent faces. No! Julia cried, rushing toward them, but the sudden whirlwind of thoughts made her stumble. In that intimacy of family connection, she felt the suffocating shadows creeping back, seeping in through the walls. Stay back! She screamed, her voice slicing through the tension. As she reached them, she grasped their shoulders tightly, feeling the tremors of their innocence. Suddenly, the power flickered, lights dimmed then sputtered out. The room plunged into darkness, save for the flashing of lightning outside. Julia's heart pulsed in time with the thunder, a drum signaling the arrival of something fearsome. In that instant, an unsettling whisper echoed through the room. It's already begun. The words trembled, an echo of her neighbor's voice, threading through the shadows enveloping them. Mommy, I'm scared. Jake whimpered, squeezing tightly to Mia. I know, sweetheart. I know, Julia whispered, her voice wavering. Desperation clawed at her throat. She turned back toward the door. Whatever was out there, it wanted in. The sound of soft, padding footsteps danced through the silence, a haunting melody that only stoked the fire of terror in her gut. In the blackness, moments stretched painfully thin. Julia's mind raced. She needed answers, a way out of the whirlwind. But the threatening storm outside wasn't the only thing to fear. And as another flash of lightning split the sky, illuminating their living room in stark white, Julia's eyes widened. The ominous figure was closer now, far too close. How long do we have? She thought, as dread seeped into her bones. Would they escape Ashford Pines, or would the darkness consume them whole? What awaited them outside? She stood frozen, the weight of the unknown pushing down on her, stealing her breath. And in this silence, she felt all watched by the walls, by the shadows creeping with malevolent intent, waiting for the moment she would break. But how long could she hold out? That chill in the air whispered the dreadful truth, perhaps it was already too late. The storm raged on, an ominous symphony of howling wind and torrential rain that washed against the windows like a predator scratching to get in. Julia held her breath, heart pounding furiously as she strained to make sense of her surroundings. The room felt alive, the shadows twisting and curling in the corners, mocking her fear. Each flicker of lightning illuminated the unnerving sight of her children huddled close, their innocence a stark contrast to the malevolence clawing at the edges of reality. Mommy! Mia ventured, her wide eyes filled with an innocent terror that knifed through Julia's heart. I want to go to Grandma's. I don't like it here. Julia swallowed hard. I know, sweetheart. But we can't right now, not with the storm. Her voice cracked, revealing the cracks in her own composure. Suddenly, the front door rattled violently, as if something outside fought to break through, sending a surge of adrenaline racing. Get back! Julia shouted reflexively, pushing the children behind her. The door quivered under the pressure. A surge of doubt ripped through her mind. What if it wasn't just the storm? A moment later, it went silent. The quiet was suffocating. It seeped into her bones and brought an unbearable weight to the air. The absence of sound only made the shadows feel more powerful, looming closer. Then, as if responding to her fear, the whisper returned, echoing through the darkness, a faint, haunting sigh that curled around her like smoke.
"Mom, I heard it again," Jake whispered, his voice barely above a breath. She steeled her resolve, steadying herself, desperately clawing back to rational thoughts. "It's just the wind," she murmured, forcing a smile that never reached her eyes. But deep down, she knew the truth wasn't so simple. Something was gathering outside, drawn to their fear like moths to a flame. Without warning, the lights flickered back to life, casting harsh illumination across the room. Instinctively, she turned toward the window. Her breath hitched painfully in her throat as she spotted the figure standing just outside, barely discernible behind the curtain of rain. Cloaked in darkness, it shifted unnaturally, limbs bending in grotesque angles that defied the limits of human movement. Julia's stomach lurched. "What is it?" she screamed, panic spilling over as she picked up the phone, trembling hands dialing 911. Nothing but static answered her call. The line was dead. "Mommy, it's coming closer," Mia cried, pointing. The little girl's voice was sharp with fear, breaking Julia from her stupor. She dropped the phone, moving instinctively to corral her children, ushering them away from the window. Outside, the figure paused, head tilted at an unnatural angle. Julia could feel its gaze pierce through her, a cold, suffocating weight that wrapped around her throat like a noose. She turned her back to the window, shielding her children. "Follow me. We need to go," she screamed, urgency thrumming in her veins. But her mind was spinning, a carousel of desperate options and paralyzing fear. As they raced toward the hallway, the front door creaked slowly open. Julia froze, the world narrowing to the sound of her pulse echoing in her ears. The wind howled and twisted the shadows within, and she felt them swirling around her, as if sand in a violent storm. "What if it comes in?" Jake asked, his eyes wide with terror, panic flashing in every innocent line of his face. "Stay close," she instructed, her voice barely staying steadied. "Now! Go into the basement." They flew down the hallway, the sounds of the storm masking their footsteps as Julia's mind scrambled for clarity. The basement was an unsettling place, filled with memories of clattering shelves and rusted tools, but it felt safer than facing what lurked beyond the door. Just as they reached the basement stairs, the lights flickered again, and the figure appeared in the doorway. "No!" she screamed as she rushed forward, pulling the children with her. But the basement door slammed shut behind them, the sound reverberating like a death knell. She stumbled, panic flooding her system as she pressed her back against the door, breath stalling in her chest. "Mia! Jake! We need to be quiet." Her voice trembled as she peered into the darkness, the flickering light from outside casting eerie patterns against the walls. They were trapped. The storm and whatever haunted it had closed in. Just then, Jake tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, it's not just the storm." The lights above buzzed and flickered dangerously, casting deeper shadows across the cramped space as she felt the tension rise. Where would they find hope when all they had left was fear? Suddenly, a loud crash reverberated from the hallway above, and the floor shook beneath them. "What was that?" Mia gasped, her small hand grasping Julia's tighter. Julia could only stare wide-eyed at the door, dread pooling in the pit of her stomach. Outside, something terrible was happening, and it was coming for them. Then came the sickening snap of wood splintering, the sound slicing through the darkness as the door began to crack open. What lurked in that flood of shadows? What horrors awaited them just steps away? As the silhouette stretched closer into their view, Julia knew one thing for certain: they couldn't stay hidden much longer. The door creaked agonizingly as it opened, the splintering wood groaning under its own weight, signaling the terror that awaited. Julia's heart raced, pounding against her ribcage like a trapped animal. She pressed her body harder against the wooden barrier, willing it to hold against whatever madness lurked above. "Mommy, I can't breathe," Mia whimpered, face pressed against Julia's arm, her small body trembling.
Shoo! Just hold on.
It's okay, Julia whispered, though her voice wavered on the edge of breaking. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, but she couldn't abandon her children.
Where would they run to?
The storm outside roared, drowning out the whispers that fluttered at the edges of her awareness. But she could feel them pulsing the shadows, the dreadful anticipation that seeped through the cracks of the door, mixing with the potent scent of wet earth and decay.
Mom!
Jake's voice was small, barely a breath.
What if it's not just the storm? The question hung bitterly in the air, thickening the tension.
Julia dared a glance back at the basement, the partial darkness seeming to swallow them whole. The light flickered above like a dying star, reflecting on dirt-covered walls lined with old tools, their rusting jagged edges gleaming ominously. A crash echoed from the depths of the house, louder than before. The floor shivered beneath them, and a desperate surge of adrenaline coursed through Julia.
We need to be quiet. If it comes down here, she couldn't finish her thought, but the implication was enough.
Her heart sank as the door hung open just enough for a shadow to stretch forth long, slender limbs that seemed to drip with darkness itself.
Goosebumps prickled on her arms. It's here!
Mia's voice trembled, every word laced with sheer terror. Close your eyes, Julia commanded, forcing her voice to remain steady, though a faint quiver betrayed her anxiety.
Don't open them no matter what you hear.
As the shadow pulse grew stronger, Julia pressed herself against the doorframe, instinctively lunging forward just as it attempted to slip inside. It hesitated, retracting. A moment of eerie stillness cloaked the basement, tension thickening like fog. The flickering light above burst into chaos, casting fractured beams that danced wildly. In that chaos, she stole a glimpse of its former grotesque face, hollow-eyed and twisted in agony. It reached for them, fingers rasping against the edge of the door until crack. The door pushed open with a force that sent Julia crashing backwards, her children tumbling into an abyss of dark corners.
No!
She screamed, scrambling to her feet. Outside, another crash sent a shudder through the house.
Julia's mind raced. Why was it still there? Why hadn't it come down the stairs yet?
She noticed her children staring wide-eyed toward the back of the basement, where a flicker of movement caught Julia's eye. Shadows writhed as if alive, pulling back the heavy veil of darkness to reveal a grim side object shifting unnaturally at the far end.
What is that?
Mia squeaked, gripping Jake's arm. Julia squinted into the blackness, her grip tightening around the old hammer she had seen lying uselessly against the wall. Fear propelled her forward, every nerve screaming as she moved closer to the shifting shapes. The light flickered again, illuminating her path as the channel grew wider. Old furniture, decaying and rotting, formed a barricade. Beneath it, a chilling whisper echoed from the depths. It was a whisper she recognized, a familiar voice that clawed at her sanity. "Leave this place before it takes you." Julia froze. Her blood ran cold. That voice. It belonged to her mother, the woman who had told her stories about spirits, dark nights, and fables that were never just tales. Dread soaked into her very bones. Suddenly, a guttural noise, a low growl, resonated throughout the basement, cloaked darkness devouring the remaining light.
"Mom!"
Jake called, his panic ripping through her.
With a surge of courage, Julia turned back toward her children. "We need to leave." But where? Where was safe? Just then,
the ground quaked beneath her feet, and the shadows coiled tighter. The whisper returned, echoing louder, mingling with the laughter of children, a mocking sound that sent chills racing down her spine. As Julia's eyes adjusted to the darkness, she caught a glimpse of something else, figures standing, barely visible, faces hidden but familiar.
"Mommy!"
"I can see them," Mia breathed quietly, pointing into the depths of the shadows. But Julia's heart raced with dread. Something wasn't right. Behind those shadowy figures, something larger loomed, a colossal presence ready to consume everything in its path. The oppressive air thickened, panic flooding her senses as the dark shapes began advancing.
"Run!"
she screamed, the certainty clawing at her throat as the figures moved closer, casting long, encompassing shadows that swallowed the very essence of the basement hole. Julia pushed her children ahead, heart pounding, and fear clinging tightly to her throat. But just as she turned to follow them, a set of cold, hollow eyes met hers, and she stumbled back. Mia screamed as the shadows wrapped tighter around them, the laughter echoing louder, and for the first time, Julia felt genuinely terrified. What would they face next? What awaited in this nightmare unbroken by light? The walls of reality were closing in, time was short. As the shadows shifted, drawing even closer, Julia realized there might be no escape. But was there a way to confront it? What secrets lay behind those lost souls that could change everything? The shadows advanced relentlessly, a tidal wave of despair pushing against Julia and her children. She could feel their cold grip trying to pull her back, smothering her courage. The darkness seemed alive, shifting and writhing, eager to devour. Julia's instincts screamed for survival as panic grew like a wildfire in her chest. "Mommy, I can't!" Mia cried, her small voice drowned by the cacophony of sinister laughter echoing from the darkened corners. "Don't stop! Keep moving!" Julia barked, instinctively gripping Jake's hand while pulling Mia forward. They stumbled over scattered debris, their feet skidding on rotting wood and broken glass. They had to reach the stairs, had to find a way out of the house. The basement light flickered overhead, casting erratic shadows that danced like phantoms, as if mocking their plight. With each flicker, Julia caught glimpses of twisted faces peering from the corners, eyes brimming with sorrow and rage. Were they watching her, judging her? The thought made her stomach churn. Then came that voice again, closer this time, its tone sweet yet sinister. "You can't leave," it coaxed, echoing through the air. "We are your family now." Julia's heart twisted painfully as she recognized it. Her mother's voice had turned unbearable, dripping with an otherworldly distortion. "Mom!" Jake shouted, tugging at her arm. The tremor in his voice shook her from the spell. The familiar warmth of his touch reigniting a fire within her. She was a mother, a protector. They darted past the jagged remnants of old furniture, and just ahead in the flickering light, the stairs loomed like a beacon, their wooden steps appearing both familiar and foreign. But dark tendrils reached up from below, snaking around the banister, eager to ensnare. Julia propelled her children forward, each step feeling like a battle against the oppressive force trying to drag them back. Suddenly, a blinding flash illuminated the room. The flood of light revealed a grotesque tableau, shadows morphing into anguished faces, their mouths stretching wide in silent screams. It was an eruption of souls trapped between two worlds, their eyes pleading, desperate for release. "Mommy! It's so dark!" Mia cried, her voice almost lost in the chaos. Julia tightened her grip, the raw fear in her daughter's voice driving her forward. "Just a little longer, we're almost there," she urged, desperation blending with defiance. But as they reached the bottom of the stairs, dread washed over them when they saw a figure blocking their escape. It stood tall, shrouded in a cloak of shadows, a grotesque amalgam of the faces they had glimpsed already. "Do you really want to leave?" it asked, its voice smooth like silk, yet laced with malice. It swirled closer, tendrils of darkness stretching forth, grabbing at Julia's hair, pulling her toward it. She fought against it, teeth clenched, defiance burning brighter. "Let go of us!" she screamed, filling the space with her rage, her love for her children fueling her strength. Behind her, she felt Jake and Mia clutch her legs, fear palpable in their small bodies. They were all in this together. That thought alone propelled her forward as she summoned every ounce of determination she had left. With a sharp yank, she broke free from the grasp of shadows, sending a cascade of dark whispers flailing against the wall. "Run!" she yelled, pushing her children up the stairs as she stepped into the blinding light. The moment her foot hit the first stair, the echoes of laughter morphed into wails, a desperate chorus of desperation behind them. The air crackled with energy as the figure lunged forward, reaching for them with elongated fingers. But the staircase, once a hallowed passage to safety, had morphed into a chasm of pure terror. "Faster! Don't look back! Hold on to each other!" Julia shouted, each word a lifeline as they ascended, pounding toward the door at the top. But as they neared the entrance, a silence fell. An unnatural stillness that felt like the eye of a massive storm. Julia hesitated, heart racing. What awaited them above? Was the house truly a prison, or would they find salvation? The echoes of the lost souls reverberated sharply in her mind, and for a split second, she was paralyzed by uncertainty. Should she turn back? Should they confront the darkness head-on, or was running really the answer? As they reached the top, the door creaked ominously, and Julia pressed against it, heart hammering in her chest, poised between hope and horror. What horror lay in wait beyond that door? Would the outside world remain unchanged, or had their reality twisted even further beneath the weight of her past? Mom! Jake's voice broke her chain of thought. It won't budge. What do we do? Julia realized, with dawning dread, that this was just the beginning. They could run, but the nightmares were no longer confined to the basement and time was running out. The door held secrets that might just consume them all. The hairs on the back of Julia's neck bristled as she pressed her ear against the door, heart thudding in her chest. The silence beyond felt alive, crawling with foreboding. Was it truly empty, or was something waiting there with bated breath? Mom, please. Mia whimpered, her small voice shattering the stillness, I'm scared. Julia turned, swallowing hard as she raked her fingers through her hair. I know, honey, but we can't give up. We just can't. Jake was shaking, his face pale under the flickering light. The sight of her children, so vulnerable, stoked the fire of her fear. Yet it also reminded her of her resolve. They had to find a way out. Behind them, the basement door trembled, rattling with an unseen energy. The figure no longer just shadows gathered around the edges, its eyes like dark pits, promising endless despair. She could feel its pull, that siren song of dread trying to ink its way into her thoughts, trying to persuade her to surrender. Focus, Julia. Focus. The mantra echoed in her mind as she threw her weight against the door, pushing with all her strength, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if it had merged with the house itself, a sentient barrier sealing their fate. Mom! Jake cried, panic bursting within his words. It's gonna get us. No! She shouted, panting. I won't let it. There had to be another way. Moving quickly, she darted back down the cold, tight staircase and into the basement's oppressive darkness. The shadows shifted, glaring at her like a predator cornering its prey. The air thickened, pressing against her skin like ice. She scanned the room, taking stock of what was left, rusted tools, broken furniture, a forgotten world. But it was the walls that drew her attention first. Openings, dark voids in the wooden panels hinted at passageways long concealed. Could one of these lead them to safety? She turned back to her children. Stay close. With quickened breaths, she headed towards the nearest gap, her instincts kicking in. As they approached, she felt the chill of despair wrap tighter around them. Mommy? Mia whispered, clutching tight to her hand. With a steely resolve, Julia navigated the darkness, clutching the kid's hands like a lifeline. The shadows twisted closer, a creeping sensation that skated over her skin. They were like whispers, murmurs of souls lost, dragging at the edges of her mind. Push through, Julia. Just push through, she muttered under her breath, ignoring the gnawing fear dancing in her stomach. As they neared the gap, the whispers erupted into frantic hisses, clawing at her resolve. Leave to be whole again, the voices screeched, their tones both haunting and alluring, drawing her in like moths to a flame. Julia shuddered, shaking her head to clear her thoughts. No, I won't leave them. She yelled, the sound reverberating back to her like a taunt. With a swift movement, she plunged into the darkness, dragging her children along. The sensation was immediate, a rush as if they were being pulled through a dark tunnel. It was disorienting. For every step they took, the shadows clung like a heavy fog, almost tangibly grasping at their throats. Then, all at once, they tumbled into what felt like an ancient passageway, the air thick with dust and the scent of decay. There was no turning back now. Is this safe? Jake asked, his voice straining, penetrating the gloom. Just keep moving. Julia urged, a surge of determination drilling down into her bones. They could not let the darkness find them, not now, not ever. As they moved deeper, an unsettling sound echoed through the corridor, the unmistakable sound of scratching. Nails on wood, a desperate plea. She froze momentarily, dread flooding her senses.
The walls seemed to pulse, as if the house itself was alive, breathing down their necks.
Then a flicker of light appeared ahead, illuminating the path just a few feet further. Hope ignited within her, and she propelled herself and her children forward, not daring to look behind. But as they neared the source of the light, the scratching intensified, a crescendo of urgency, and the
whispers transformed into screams of fury.
"Wait for us, we won't let you leave," the voices cried, twisting into one anguished symphony just behind them.
What awaited them in the flickering glow? What shadows lurked behind?
As they stepped closer, the light flickered and began to fade.
The walls seemed to close in. "Mom! I don't want to get lost,"
Mia pleaded, eyes wide with terror.
Just as Julia clutched their hands tighter, the light extinguished completely, plunging them back into the stifling blackness. And then she heard it, a loud thud, echoing down the corridor. A heavy breath, all-consuming. What had they awakened, and could they escape the insatiable hunger of the darkness creeping ever closer?
The cold air wrapped around them like an icy grip, squeezing the breath from Julia's lungs. The darkness surged, shifting, and the childlike grip of Mia tightened painfully in her hand. Julia dared not breathe too deeply, not knowing if it would invoke whatever lay in the shadows behind them.
"Mom!
I don't want this." Jake's voice trembled, cracking under pressure. Her heart sank, weighing heavier with each passing moment. She had to stay strong for them. "Just a little further, I promise," Julia urged, forcing the words through quaking lips.
The faint echo of thudding grew, drowning out her thoughts.
It felt like the house itself was syncing with their heartbeat, pulsating wildly as if it sought to claim them.
"Mom!" The voices.
Mia whimpered, tears glistening in her wide eyes. Julia squeezed her daughter's hand tighter.
"I know, sweetheart. Just don't listen, don't give in."
She could feel the whispers coiling around them, a symphony of despair demanding their surrender. They stumbled forward, the air thick with must and decay, urging them to stop as if it were alive.
Just ahead, the glow reappeared, flickering like a lost star, desperate and inviting. "Keep close,"
Julia shouted, pushing past her own fear. Each step toward the light felt heavier, like wading through a murky river. They were nearly there, but the shadows danced more violently, clawing at her heels. Suddenly, a shrill scream pierced the air, reverberating through the passage.
"Leave us. Let us be. You don't belong here."
The words struck like ice-cold water, freezing her in place.
"Don't listen," Julia shouted, forcing her feet to move.
In her grip, the children surged forward, their bodies moving against the tide of fear.
"Mom, what is it?" Jake cried. Just a little more,"
she managed, her voice stretched thin with exhaustion.
An intense heat flooded the space, the kind that stings against exposed skin, yet the darkness shrouded them like a heavy blanket.
Julia's heart raced, she wasn't sure it was just her fear anymore. The shadows felt hungry, eager, thirsty for something they couldn't see. She pressed her back against the wall and led the kids along it, fingers grazing its rough surface.
"We've got to find a way out."
But as they passed through the flickering light, dread unfurled in her stomach, thick and unyielding. The whispers morphed, sharpened, and her senses exploded with what felt like hundreds of eyes watching them. Suddenly, the warmth of the light faded, consumed by a wave of darkness.
"Mom! I can't see." Mia's voice was a whimper lost in terror.
"Shoo!" Julia hissed, frantically searching for the light again, for any sign of safety.
The scratching returned, more relentless, each scrape a countdown to something sinister.
She pressed onward, praying for a door, a way out, anything but the tightening grip of despair surrounding them. Just then, a faint sound broke through soft sobbing, barely audible. Julia stopped, heart pounding against her ribs.
"Do you hear that?" Jake nodded, eyes wide. "Mom? Is someone there?" "No, we have to keep moving."
But a part of her felt drawn toward it, toward the sadness that poured from the unseen. Her instincts screamed at her to flee, yet the compassion in her heart urged her to listen. The sobs grew louder, sharper, turning to wails just behind the wall.
"Help us! Don't leave us! The voices twisted her stomach like a vice. But before she could turn back, the deafening thud erupted again, closer this time. It echoed, shaking the ground beneath them. "Run!" she screamed, a primal instinct snapping into place as she pulled her children along. With no choice left, they barreled forward into the jagged darkness. The walls exploded with noise, the anguished cries mixing with a cacophony of shrieks as they fled from whatever haunted the depths behind them. In an instant, they crashed into a wider passage, the shrieks drowning in the echoing space. But ahead, a dark figure loomed against the far wall, half concealed in shadows, glinting with something sharp and sinister. Julia's stomach dropped. "What is that?" And without warning, the figure moved, gliding toward them with a predatory grace. The walls began to pulse like a heartbeat, sending waves of panic through her body. "Mom!" Jake lunged forward, a scream trembling in his throat. "Back! Stay back!" Julia yelled, shielding Mia as best she could. But the figure's presence loomed larger, hungry to pull them into the very darkness they had tried so hard to evade. What awaited them in the depths? Would they uncover the truth behind the sorrowful cries, or would they surrender themselves to those shadows forever? Julia braced herself, knowing there would be no turning back now. The dark figure advanced, the very air around it thickening with malevolence. Julia felt Mia's grip weaken, her little fingers slipping as fear seeped into their bond. She had to protect them. But in front of her, the creature moved with an unnatural fluidity, its face obscured yet somehow familiar. "Mom, I don't want to die." Jake's voice cracked like glass, and each word shattered her resolve further. "Hold on. Just hold on to me," Julia shouted, pulling Mia close. Her heart raced, thundering like a warning bell, drowning out everything else. The figure stopped, revealing a darkened face that shifted into twisted fragments of desperate souls. She recognized them, faces she'd seen in photographs, names whispered turning to legends about lost children. But their eyes bore the weight of eternal despair, yet they reached out as if pleading for her to join them. In that moment, a wave of anguish washed over Julia, choking her as a memory surged. She had heard of this place, stories hidden in hushed tones, a street where children had vanished, swallowed by the insatiable dark. Their cries echoed in her mind, mingled with her own. "Mom!" The sharp pang of Mia's voice pierced through her agony. The dark figure moved closer, each step sending ripples of dread through the air around them. "Run!" Julia screamed again, her voice hoarse with urgency. She yanked her children along, ignoring the wave of pain crashing over her shoulders. They dashed away from the truth lurking in those shadowy eyes, breaking free of an invisible grip trying to pull them back into the horrors that stirred just beyond their reach. Behind them, the anguished wails grew louder, pulling at Julia's heart, twisting it in knots. "Help us, don't leave us" became an echo she couldn't shake. They were losing ground, every second dragging out like an eternity, the darkness clawing at their heels. The walls of the passage seemed to pulse with their fear, darkness flickering like a dying flame. Julia's pulse raced as they barreled into another corridor, lined with doors that loomed ominously, waiting for their chance to ensnare the next lost soul. "Mom! Where do we go?" Jake's voice trembled with panic, and she could feel the staff of fear gripping him. Her pulse quickened. "I don't know. Just pick a door." It was a desperate choice, but there was no time to ponder any other options. They chose the first door to the right, jamming it open and spilling into a room thick with shadows. It smelled of mold and rot, choking her as they stumbled over old furniture. Mia whimpered beside her, and Julia turned to her, but her words died in her throat when she spotted a small girl huddled in the corner, shaking. "Stay close," she warned, and the moment of hesitation sent a chill through her, gnawing at her resolve. Was this another lost soul or something worse? "Please. Help me." The girl's voice trembled, a mirage of innocence, yet trailing behind it, the whispers of forsaken hope. Julia felt a pull, a sickly sweet urge to help, but the very fabric of the room quaked with unseen terror. "We can't stay," she urged her children, the urgency wrapped around them tighter with the retreating echoes of wails pounding against them. "Please don't leave me." The girl's cries echoed with the haunting certainty of despair, wrapping around their hearts. Julia faltered for a moment, knowing that every second spent in indecision edged them closer to total darkness.
A sharp thud outside the door made her heart leap into her throat.
The figure was back, stalking them, its presence like a thick fog choking the air tight. Nia screamed, "Why won't you help her?" "Because I can't," Julia shouted back.
She was losing grip on everything, fear twisting her vision, the looming shadow shattering the fragile thread of hope. With a last desperate glance, Julia seized Mia's hand and Jake's, racing toward a window, the only light in this suffocating room. But as they neared, the figure stretched impossibly, writhing to block their escape.
Wails of the lost surged around them, echoing with cruel laughter that sent icy fingers down her spine. Were they too late? Would they, too, become part of the shadows?
Just as the figure lunged forward, a jagged piece of glass reflected the light, sending a sharp gleam across the room.
"Jump!"
Julia screamed, and without thinking, they pushed through the window. Just beyond, the leaden sky poured darkness down, and everything shimmered like a nightmare.
She could still hear the girl's voice echo behind them, "Please don't leave, I need you." Would they survive this leap into the unknown? Or would they also vanish into the twisted tales of those forgotten? Julia's heart sank as they fell, staring into the abyss below, terrified of what awaited.
But they would not go down without a fight. The air rushed past them, cold and sharp, as Julia's heart raced faster than the ground approaching. She had no idea how far they would fall or what awaited them below. The world above felt like a fading memory, each shadow resonating with the agonizing tones of the lost souls that had been absorbed into Ashford Pines.
"Mom!"
Jake's voice wavered, a raw edge of panic lacing his words.
Julia tightened her grip on her children, a fierce protectiveness igniting as they plummeted into the darkness. Then, with a jarring thud, they hit the ground harder than she anticipated.
As they landed, a pulse of force radiated through her body. It knocked the wind from her lungs, but instinctively, she rolled, shielding her children as best as she could. Dizzy and disoriented, Julia pushed herself up, blinking hard against the unexpected light that flooded the space. They were in a hidden clearing, surrounded by thick trees that twisted like gnarled hands towards the sky.
The air felt different, charged, electric.
She could hear soft whispers, more distant now, but less pressing, as if finally freed from the weight of the house.
"Is this real?" Mia breathed, taking in their unfamiliar surroundings.
The tension in Julia's chest began to ease as she scanned the area. It was peaceful, far away from the torment of Ashford Pines, yet a part of the forest held something sinister.
She could feel it, something far off, still lingering.
"We can't stop here," Julia insisted, gripping both of her children's hands, despair giving way to urgency.
"We need to find a way out."
As they moved forward, the trees themselves seemed alive, branches extending and recoiling. With each step, Julia sensed a pull from deep within the woods, leading them deeper into the heart of something ancient and unknown. Just as fear began to bubble up again, a familiar warmth enveloped them, a gentle light glowing softly like a beacon ahead.
Julia hesitated, fear warring with hope. Could this light be trusted? "Stay close,"
she instructed, heart racing as they pressed on.
Inside the clearing, the whispers transformed into giggles, the laughter of children dancing through the crisp night air.
In the center lay a small, radiant orb, pulsating with life. She could feel her heart sinking to its rhythm.
"Mama?"
Mia whispered, gazing at the orb with innocent wonder. "Stay with me," Julia murmured, drawn by the light, the laughter washing away the darker memories of Ashford Pines. The further she stepped into the clearing, the lighter the atmosphere became, brushing against her like feathers against her skin. But the shadows from Ashford Pines tugged at her mind, memories clawing their way out as echoes of despair vibrated between the trees. They could try to escape, but could they really leave those trapped behind? Julia's heart quaked with the burden of their choices.
Mommy Jake's voice was small, the fear creeping back. "What if we're not really free? What if this is another trap?" Julia's heart sank, uncertainty biting deep. "I won't let that happen. We'll find out the truth."
She directed her gaze toward the orb, where childlike faces flickered momentarily, the lost but not forgotten.
"Mom! It's moving!"
Mia exclaimed, drawing attention to the orb that began to shimmer brighter with each heartbeat. Suddenly, an anguished scream pierced the air, sending ripples through the light. Julia froze, heart in her throat, as the shadows from the trees began to whirl closer, their forms shifting into familiar but twisted faces. "Leave this place!" they cried out, sorrow intertwined with rage. "You cannot pass!" Julia felt Jake and Mia cling to her tighter, their little faces pinched with fear. This was no longer just a personal fight, it was a battle for so many lost souls yearning for liberation. Steeling herself, Julia raised her chin, feeling the fierce love for her children ignite a fire in her heart. "You will not take us back. We're fighting for our freedom." Her voice rang out, resonating with every ounce of fury she had in her. The orb flickered and pulsed as if responding to her strength. "No! You cannot! Escape!" The faces twisted with anger, shadows coiling in response. And just then, the orb burst forth in an explosion of light, brighter than the sun. Julia shielded her eyes but felt its warmth envelop her, washing away her fear. The shadows recoiled, howling in agony as they were met with the brilliance of the orb. With a newfound resolve, she urged her children forward, guiding them toward the light, her heart racing faster and faster until she was certain they would burst through. "Run, children! Run!" she shouted, adrenaline surging. Together, they sprinted toward the orb, the shadows clawing at their heels. Julia felt lighter each step, breaking through the demonic binds of despair. The laughter surged again, mingled with the cries of the lost now resonating around them, forming a symphony of hope intertwined with sorrow. In an instant, the orb enveloped them completely. The darkness tore away, and with it, the echoes and whispers of Ashford Pines faded into silence. Seconds stretched into an eternity, the world around them blurring as they burst through the veil of darkness, exploding into bright sunlight. Julia gasped, falling to her knees as she found herself back in her own living room, the soft warmth of the sun streaming through the window. Jake and Mia landed beside her, breathing heavily but alive, completely free. The shadows were gone. The air vibrated with silence, save for the gentle rustle of leaves outside. Tears cascaded freely down her cheeks. They were home. No longer trapped in the horrors of Ashford Pines. The shadows that once loomed over them evaporated, and the whispers of past souls faded into the depths of memory. "I thought we lost," Mia whimpered, a slight quiver still threading her voice. "We didn't." Julia hugged them close, holding them tighter than ever. "We made it. Together." As they embraced, Julia felt the weight of their journey lift, her heart swelling with love and relief. Their family had faced darkness side by side, and now they could forge forward into a brighter future. Turning away from the shadows of her past, Julia took a deep breath, her new beginning stretching before them like an open road, illuminated by the promise of hope. And so, dear friends, as Julia and her children emerged into a world unburdened by fear, let this story be a reminder to all of us to confront our darkness, to protect our loved ones, and above all to never ignore the whispers of hope. Now, listen up. You need to subscribe now. Hit that subscribe button immediately, so you don't miss the next exclusive stories we have lined up. They're going to be epic. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm, it helps more than you think. Flood the comments section with your reactions and theories about this ending. I want to see what you all think. And don't wait even one more second, share this video with at least 5 friends who need to experience this conclusion. Real fans understand the power of supporting the channel through these actions. Thank you, love you all.